The U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iran continue, with President Donald Trump saying they could go on for another 4 or 5 weeks. Iran's response is meanwhile causing havoc in the region as it lashes out at Arab neighbors and its terror proxies target Israel. Where's this headed, and what does Iran and the region look like when it's over?
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is All Things with Kim Strassel.
We are fortunate to have joining us to talk about those weighty questions and many others, Jonathan Schanzer, the executive director at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Jonathan, I know this is a really busy time, so I really appreciate your coming in and enlightening us this week.
My pleasure.
Let's just start by talking about the strikes themselves. The reports are that the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and some 40 other regime leaders are dead. The U.S. and Israel have targeted nuclear facilities, military infrastructure sites, naval ships. How do you view the planning and execution of these strikes so far? How much has actually been accomplished?
Well, I mean, the execution has been remarkable. From the first strike, which took out Khamenei and a number of other senior Iranian officials, to the follow-up, which has been, I think, more than 2,000 strikes over the first 3 days across a wide range of military infrastructure, including some of the core components of the regime itself. This has been, I think, nothing short of spectacular. But I think we need to acknowledge a few things. Number one, the regime still has the ability to fire missiles, and they've been able to do so with lethal results. We've seen them score direct hits in Israel. There was an attack on a building in Bahrain that actually injured 2 Department of War officials. We've seen attacks on oil infrastructure, energy infrastructure. Surrounding Arab states have also been hit. So the war is not over, even though a lot has been done so far to roll back the strength of the regime. Something else that I think, has probably not gone well noticed here in the United States, there was a declaration of total air superiority in the skies over Iran, meaning there are no air defenses left for the regime to use, or no air defenses to speak of.
Right.
So a lot to be proud of here. I think a lot has gone well, but I think the warning is, don't expect the regime to stop firing, number one. Maybe number two is, there is no step-by-step instruction guide for how to topple a regime. What are the things that need to happen in order for this all to end? I think, you've got Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu and the CIA and the Mossad. Everybody's working overtime to try to come up with the right solution to ending the war on the right terms.
Can I just drill down into this question, though, of the 40 supposedly top leaders that were eliminated? What does that actually mean in reality? Because I've heard military people talk about this before, that sometimes in regimes like this, because of the nature of them, they tend to be very top heavy, meaning like a few people make all the decisions. Very different from, for instance, like our U.S. chain of command, where if somebody at the top goes, the next person knows they're in charge, the next person, and they have authority. How terrible is this in terms of their military leadership, but also the sort of organs they have for repression in the country, having taken out the 40 individuals that we did?
So the repression apparatus is sadly, I think, still very much intact. Here we're talking about the Basij. This is the domestic paramilitary forces that were responsible for slaughtering 30 to 40,000 Iranians leading up to this war. And from all indications right now, that is still intact. So keeping the people down, we've not solved that problem yet. But as for the external decision-making, the kind of war-making decisions, I think there we're probably seeing some better results. I mean, the defense minister was killed. Key members of the National Security Council killed. So you have a lot of these top decision makers. Now that, let me just say, it clearly has not stopped the regime from firing at Israel, at our Gulf neighbors, at the United States. So they clearly have targets, and they've got this ability to execute on those targets based on intelligence that was probably pre-mined I'm guessing a lot of what we're seeing right now is plans that were put into place well before this war kicked off. And there, I just need to say that, we lost the element of surprise, right? We were sitting in the Gulf and in the Med for 5 weeks, right?
Right,
So there
right.
was no way that they weren't preparing for the counter response. I think there is a question, though, of, in my mind, how many missiles they have. More importantly, how many missile launchers they have. And this is the other kind of undocumented element of this war. And we'll hear more about it, I'm guessing, in the days to come. The United States and Israel are absolutely, they're doing a terrific job of hunting and destroying the missiles. But it's those launchers that are the most important, the ones that are static and the ones that are mobile, because there are fewer of them. So you could have 5,000 missiles, but if you only have 500 rocket launchers and those numbers are dwindling over time, the regime will be able to squeeze off fewer and fewer rounds. And that, I think, is kind of the next, after air superiority, I think the missile launchers are probably the next major milestone, because once you could do that, then you remove the regime's ability to do damage to America's allies and assets across the Middle East.
The other piece of this, you're talking about Iran itself, but obviously are its proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis. And interestingly, it does look as though Israel is now using some of the attacks that have come, for instance, from Hezbollah to as a reason to engage in a little bit of overdue housekeeping from their perspective in sort of targeting those very bad elements. What do you see happening there?
Well, I mean, Monday has been a remarkable day as far as news is concerned outside of Iran, despite the fact that, the big news is Iran. For those that have been watching the Middle East, the last, sort of 24 hours have been absolutely remarkable. I mean, so you have these 3 long-range rockets fired out of Lebanon. The Israelis intercept them. So there's no major grievance here, other than the fact that the airspace was penetrated. And that, as you suggest, gave the Israelis the predicate to take a significant response. So what have they done so far? They took out the head of Hezbollah's intelligence, who's a high-ranking official within the organization. They've declared their intent to take Naim Qassem off the playing field. This is the Secretary General. This is the successor to Hassan Nasrallah. By the way, that's a double-edged sword. I mean, I've heard from Israelis saying this guy is an absolute incompetent and that he would be better left in place, right? I mean, one Israeli joked with me about a year ago, talking to him. He said, we would go to war to keep this guy in power. And now all of a sudden they're talking about removing him. But, they have conducted wide strikes across Lebanon in response to those 3 rockets launched. They've taken out a large amount of military infrastructure just in one day. They have ground forces that they may yet mobilize, and that would really mark an escalation. But the fascinating part of all of this right now is the government of Lebanon has now officially declared Hezbollah military operations to be outside of the law. In other words, they have now forbade Hezbollah from taking any kinetic action at this sensitive time. Now, whether or not the Lebanese armed forces are truly able to enforce this is a big open question. But amidst all of the kind of hand-wringing and hemming and hawing about Hezbollah for the last year and several months, I mean, since the beeper operation, the grim beeper, as they call it, and the killing of Hassan Nasrallah, this is all in like late 2004. There have been big questions about what the government would or wouldn't do. Today, they seem far more interested in taking action. Again, their capabilities versus intent, I think a lot to be seen. The last thing that I'll just note about what's happening in Lebanon that I find fascinating, there's been a longstanding debate about what to do about the shadow banking system in Lebanon. It's something that is widely known as Al-Qard al-Hassan. And this network, it's all informal banking kind of networks. But the Israelis and the Lebanese and others have mapped it out. They know where the different physical nodes are across Lebanon. And I'm hearing today that they may be targeted by the Israelis in this military operation. So this would be about removing the finances as well as the missiles. This could be a debilitating blow with the government of Lebanon starting to lean in. So really big drama today in Lebanon.
That's all fascinating. And talking about Lebanon and its different attitude, this leads into another question I wanted to ask you. You know, at this point, Iran has just been hitting out at everybody. It has fired missiles or drones on Israel, obviously, but also the UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, even Oman, which was negotiating on Iran's behalf. I mean, several of these countries have actually been aligned with Iran, helping them, giving them aid and comfort over the year. And it did not help them. It did not save them. It seems that there's a lesson there, but it also seems that this is changing some actors' minds in the region. There was a lot of folks that came out initially condemnatory. Now they seem to be a little annoyed at Iran. What are you seeing on that front?
Yeah,
I mean, has Iran made a huge mistake here?
Yeah, you summed it up really well. I mean, let's just first acknowledge you've got Dubai getting hit, and Dubai has served as this like offshore bank for the Islamic Republic for a long time. I mean, it should be under sanctions. You know, Abu Dhabi is the capital of the UAE, and they're so much better. But this weird dichotomy between these two very wealthy Emirates has been, for me, hugely problematic, and it's kind of amazing to see that they got hit, amidst all of this. The Qataris also getting hit. They're sponsors of Hamas, just like Iran, right? And I mean, the irony of this, right, that all this starts with 10-7, and now the Iranians are bombing the Qataris. Okay, didn't expect that. The Omanis, right? I mean, they were, as you just noted, they were negotiating for the survival of the Islamic Republic. They also happened to host a headquarters for the Houthis in Muscat, in their capital, and yet they're getting hit. So you get a sense here, this is scorched earth. That is the strategy for the Islamic Republic. They're just bombing everybody and everything. And yes, this has changed the attitude of some of the countries in the region. The UAE and Saudi Arabia were at odds with one another just a few days ago. They're in solidarity right now, and they seem both closer and closer to maybe even wanting to get involved with this war effort, joining forces with the United States and Israel. I mean, you can hear the frustration across the Arab world, this idea that they would somehow sit out or try to remain on the fence, or even try to advocate for, a soft landing and to avoid conflict. That's all out the window now. And you do get a sense that these Arab states, they're not going to forgive or forget.
So the soft ending on that, what do you make of the conflicting claims that we've had coming out that Iran does or does not want to negotiate an end to this? The initial reports were that they were reaching out through Omani mediators. Now we've had the Iranian security head, Ali Larijani, deny this on X, saying we will not negotiate with the United States. What do you make of all that?
It's kind of a classic Iranian maneuver. They've got one hand out and the other one with maybe a shiv that they're hiding behind their back, right? And so, I'm not surprised to see the mixed messaging. I personally would not trust this at all. I think there's going to be a temptation on the part of the Trump administration, to try to limit this, right? We've already seen the death of some service members. We've seen injuries as well. War is never clean and it's never easy. There's always the unintended consequences, and they're the things that you didn't plan for, and most of them are unpleasant. So I can get a sense that there will be a temptation here. I think it is incumbent upon the Trump administration to push hard for complete capitulation by the Iranians, not to get back to the negotiating table and talk a little bit more and, maybe get a little closer. The core demands made by the United States should still hold. That is, no more nukes, no more ballistic missiles, no more proxies, and a change in the human rights posture as it relates to the domestic population in Iran. All of those things are very reasonable things to ask. We're asking Iran to end its reign of terror after nearly 50 years, right? This is a long time coming. Not a surprise that we've reached this moment. In fact, if you ask me, the main surprise is how it took so long to get here,
Right.
given the history of animosity. So I don't want to let them up off the floor. We've got a foot on their neck right now. If they are actually ready to capitulate, that's great. But the idea of talking for the sake of it, that seems like a risky endeavor for all involved.
So one thing you didn't mention in that list, all by the way, absolutely necessary capitulations by the Iranian regime. Agree with you, and we should not stop until that happens. But the one thing you didn't mention is the kind of interesting question here, because it gets to the end game too, is regime change. On the one hand, you have the president, Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu, all but pleading with the people of Iran, rise up, take over here. There seems to be, as you just mentioned, probably some hard limits on how much forces can do from the air against those arms of repression like the Basij. What do you think the administration's view is here? Is it sort of, okay, if the people rise up, great. If they don't, we'll still call this a victory if the bad guys are still in charge, but they've given up all of their, adversarial weapons against us? How do you think the administration and Israel is looking at that piece of this puzzle?
So it's a great question. And I think there are a few answers to that question, or possible answers to it. The first is, and I think we really can't rule this out, a Maduro option, a
Right.
Venezuela option, right? Where you've decapitated a lot of those top leaders from the regime. And now what you have is a second echelon of figures that probably realize that it's hazardous to your health to be a leader of the Islamic Republic, and that maybe they need to be more pragmatic and more flexible and more conciliatory to the president of the United States. And maybe they say, okay, we're going to work with you. Sort of like what we see right now with the remnants of the Maduro regime. They're working with the United States and they're being more pragmatic, and there is a sort of collaboration or cooperation. It doesn't mean that there's kumbaya. It doesn't mean that there's
Right.
mutual love and affection. It just means we understand one another. We don't want more of what just happened. And so, we're saying uncle. Now, if you ask me if that is the likely scenario, I will just say this. The regime in Iran is far more ideological than anything that we saw in the Maduro regime, right? That was a kleptocracy driven by greed and not much in the way of ideology. You could say they were far left and sort of garden variety, Latin America, anti-colonialist, anti-American, but nothing like what we're seeing out of Iran. This regime, this ideology, this revolution is deeply, deeply ideological. And the idea that we're going to be able to flip somebody or a handful of people, a cadre, I think it's difficult. It's not impossible, but I would just say keep one eye on that strategy. Now,
Right.
as for the others, let me just say, if you are a member of the opposition in Iran, you're only still alive because you kept your head down and you didn't announce yourself. You didn't make your name known. And I think that it has been hazardous to the health of all of these. We saw 30, 40,000 people mowed down in the weeks leading up to this war. That should give you an indication of why we don't have a clear sense of who's out there, like who we can work with. Now, there are clusters of people that I think we will be able to draw from when the dust begins to settle. You've got the Pahlavi regime people, right? The former crown prince, or the crown prince in exile, if you will, of the former regime. He's got a whole cadre of people that are itching to get back into Iran and to try to rebuild. You've got Mossad assets. You've got CIA assets. We know they're there. How many of them, I don't know. But, I'm guessing a lot of them are Iranian nationals and probably eager to jump in. There are a few other groups, too, that make me a little bit more nervous. Mujahideen al-Khalq, the
Right.
MEK, no thanks, hard pass, radical leftist communists that, have blood on their hands, would rather not. The last thing that I'll just say here is that no matter what happens, if we do bring back the Pahlavi crowd, the one thing that I'm nervous about is, the idea of installing a monarchy in the wake of regime change
Yeah.
just doesn't feel like an American value. And I think that that's self-explanatory. But what I think is this doesn't need to be binary. We can use Pahlavi as a figurehead to help install a democracy. This could be a constitutional monarchy along the lines of what we have in the UK, for example. That'd be a wonderful outcome where you still have the sort of remnants of the Pahlavi regime as the thing that unites the people while actually allowing for elections to take place. So I guess what I've just laid out to you is there's lots of options. And again, as I stressed before, there is no handbook for this. There's no step-by-step guide to successful regime change. We're going to need to see which levers are able to be pulled and pushed in order to get to that final destination and that positive outcome, that soft landing we talked about.
Well, you make a really great point about the difficulty with the opposition in Iran, because, often when you've seen scenarios like this in the past, the way that it comes to happen is that you've got connections with the opposition and they have their own connections within the regime, and they get some of the top people to agree that it would be better for them to kind of get some amnesty and hand things over. But this is just not a very organized opposition or an open one for the reasons that you point out. So I think that there's a fair number of difficulties there and why we don't know. Are you at all concerned that this ends up in a scenario where there's even greater repression or a prolonged civil war scenario there?
I think all of it's possible. And I think
Yeah.
anybody who tells you that we know how this is all going to work out in the end, I don't think they're realistic. It doesn't mean that, we're dealing with incompetence. I don't think that's what's happening here. I think the president of the United States, the prime minister of Israel, and all of the supporting actors here have made a decision, and they've taken a risk. And, they want the best outcome here, and they are driving toward that. And I think there's ample reason to be optimistic and sanguine about this, but there's also signs that things can always go sideways. And so, yeah, there are, negative scenarios where the regime somehow manages to hang on and it becomes more repressive and maybe, steers into a kind of a North Korea type scenario. Once they realized how penetrated they've been online and in person, you can imagine more of a hermit kingdom and more repression. I sincerely hope that doesn't happen because the Iranian people deserve a heck of a lot more than that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And actually, since we're talking about scenarios, let's finish off on a bigger regional question here. I have heard you talk about the very optimistic regional scenario here, which, by the way, I think with these strikes, we are closer to attaining at least the hope of it than at any time in going on 50 years, in that Iran has been the destabilizing force in this region for absolute decades. If you get rid of that in some form or fashion, or at least neuter its ability to be a threat, there's a potential, I think, for a real realignment. And I'd like you to talk about that, but also conversely, your biggest worries about where this goes wrong and what could happen in the region.
So maybe I'll start with the bad stuff just so we
Okay.
can try to end on a positive note.
Yes, good idea.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm worried about number one, sleeper cells in the United States. I've not been in government in a long time, but when I was, I could see evidence of it. Not a direct threat every day, but enough for people to be concerned. And we've seen, attempts on the lives of Iranian activists and American former officials, Pompeo, Brian Hook, Donald Trump
Right.
himself, for that matter, right?
Yes.
And so I am concerned that they have those capabilities. I'm going to assume that the FBI has been incredibly vigilant. Again, there was no surprise here. We knew that this was coming. And so we had 5-6 weeks to prepare. And I think that's probably a good thing. I'm concerned about oil installations getting hit. We saw the strike on Aramco today in Saudi Arabia, one of the Aramco facilities. This is the kind of thing that can derail us at home, right? You lose enough, energy. By the way, I mean, obviously there's the lives of our service members. The more that things go wrong, the more I think that battle that has been taking place inside primarily the Republican establishment, this neo-isolationist versus interventionist, however you want to describe these two camps, you could see some real infighting, result from this. And I think I'm keeping an eye on that as well. And then there's obviously just the havoc that we're watching with these missiles flying all over the Middle East. There's a lot to watch, and there's a lot that can, potentially make our leadership or others more weak in the knees. But again, I've got to say that, and this is me steering it toward the positive, the opportunity for regional, in fact, even global change is truly remarkable here. I mean, let's just acknowledge Iran has been behind the terrorism and mayhem that we've seen across the Middle East for decades now. It tracks back to one regime that has been dead set on exporting its revolution. They will do it through the Muslim Brotherhood. They will do it through Al-Qaeda. They will do it, through a wide range of terrorist actors, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis. The list goes on. And the notion that we could remove this engine of chaos from the region, to me, I'm very heartened by this. I like the idea of it. Now, again, I'm going to cede a lot can go wrong. But if you're able to remove this, and you're able then to try to fill in the void with the Abraham Accords countries that I think have had a very positive impact on the region, the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, the Israelis, you try to pull the Jordanians and the Egyptians back to where they needed to be in terms of normalization. You can imagine a pro-American alliance structure that, could inherit the region. Now, caveat here, I really don't like Qatar and Turkey inside the tent. These are Sunni powers that I got to say they're not thinking about the American interest. They're not thinking about the regional. They're thinking about their own power and their ability to grow it. But assuming you can neutralize that and the United States walks away with a win, here comes the last part. And this, I think, is the most important. You have this thing, we call it at FDD, we call it the axis of aggressors. This is the axis of China, Russia, and Iran. You could throw in North Korea too if you want to, although I think North Korea is kind of a bit player. Venezuela probably was too. But there is this axis of powers that have been trying to undermine the American-led world order. They have tried to weaken the United States and our allies. And when you take a key node of this axis off the board, it does begin to shake everything up. And the advantage, I think, starts to lean toward the United States and our ability to project power elsewhere. It's a little bit like what happened after the fall of the Soviet Union, the end of the Cold War. Our opinion mattered more. Our assertions, our vision for the world mattered more. If we can start down that road, I think, it's funny. Donald Trump's been saying, make America great again. And I've not been entirely sure what that meant for a long time now. But I will just say here that if America can project power the way that it did in the late 1980s, early 1990s, and we are seen as that undeniable superpower that is willing to act and win, well, I think we reclaim a place that we lost some time ago. And so it's for that reason that I'm somewhat sanguine. I have to just admit, though, a lot can still go wrong. I've lived through enough war to see that whatever you plan, plans are great until they make contact with the enemy. We'll have to see where this goes. But if things fall into place and if we are judicious and wise throughout this, we could steer things toward a better Middle East and a more advantageous position for the United States globally, which I think we would all get behind if we could.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And on that very optimistic note, we are going to end it. Jonathan Schanzer, Executive Director of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, thank you so much for that incredibly useful information and analysis. We want to thank our listeners for tuning in. We are here every week. If you like the show, please do hit that subscribe button, and you can write to us at atkim@wsj.com.